All right, everyone, welcome. Happy Saturday. We made it, thankfully. Hope everyone is doing okay, COVID free, and all that crazy stuff. Now, the weather is getting kind of crazy out there. I think we've been having some rain. I don't know if it's freezing rain yet, but I know we did have some rain earlier today, and it's doing something right now. Other than that, I finished the book Moneyless Society by Matt from Moneyless Society, the podcast. Read that yesterday and today. It's really good. Actually, I'm going to show you that. I'll throw that in here. I bought it, and then I read it yesterday and today. It's like 213 pages or something like that. It was good. So Matthew Holton is his name. And if you want to support him, definitely go ahead and buy this and read it. It's good if you're into resource-based economies and that sort of thing. Good ideas in there. And then this next week, at my birthday, I'm going to be reading this book. It's like 700 and some pages. So this is going to be my entire next week. I should be able to tear through this over this next week and finish it. Looking forward to it. Kind of goes over the how societies organized during the Paleolithic and during the Neolithic, trying to show the breadth of how humanity has organized itself over a short period of history. So that is what I am going to be doing. In the evening, as before I go to sleep, currently I'm reading a Dan Brown novel, Inferno. I'm reading that in the evening. So that's pretty much it for me. I took off Friday for Veterans Day, and I started reading Moneyless Society. Went out with the wife to eat at a newer local Mexican place, which was pretty good. And that's pretty much it. Just reading. And next week is going to be all reading as well. Oh, hey, Girly Bear. Welcome. You're in really early. How you doing? I'm good. It's the 16th, which is Wednesday. It's on Wednesday. Yep, and then I'll probably go to my parents' house that night for the birthday thing. And I've got Dungeons and Dragons Sunday, tomorrow, which is good. Yeah, and that's it. Pretty much, I party by reading books. So, yeah, that's what's happening with me. How's your weekend been? Your weekend been? The weather getting crazy for you? And here in Wisconsin, we don't even have snow yet. Thank you. It'll be an amazing day. I live in a position of significant, maybe not significant, but definite privilege. It's been cold. Yeah, it's been cold enough that I'm actually wearing kind of a winter coat. It hasn't been like snowing or anything like that, but yeah, it's been a lot chillier than it has been previously. It's like winter is kind of starting to really come. Definitely won't have, I can't imagine we'll have snow for Thanksgiving. I'm hoping we'll have snow by Christmas. California cold, yeah. Yeah, exactly. What's it been like? I think it's been like 60s and 70s this last week. Let me check my thing here. What does it say? Oh, it's 29, it says here. So it's actually chilly. It's been in the 30s today. Next week is in the 30s. Then by Friday, we get to 20. So it's actually cold. Not sure I like that. But okay. It says snow today, snow Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. And then cloudy after that. Okay. I guess it's been colder than I think it's been. I don't leave my office, so I don't really know. So I guess it's been cold. All right. Yeah, that's all I got. We're soft here. It's not cold where you are. Yeah, it's not too bad. Like I went out with a walk with the daughter last night, and it was I wanted my hat on because it was just, I didn't have my hat on, so my ears were getting cold, but it was okay for our walk. Yeah, it's not too bad. It's not too bad. I'm okay with it. Yeah. Uh, any things you want to cover before we get started? What I've got starting off is a bunch of stuff on COP27, and I've got like a bunch of articles on that. Cover that, and then I've got this neat. Oh, we've got this here on climate change and Shell. Then we've got this neat new wave-based technology for getting new energy. Then after that, we're still going. We got some COVID stuff. Yeah, lots of stuff to cover. Do your thing. All right. Let's get this party started. All right. First thing. This is 2 days ago from BBC. COP27, sharp rise in fossil fuel industry delegates at climate summit. Now, when I first read this, I thought it said sharp decrease, and I knew I knew that couldn't be true. I had to go back and read it again. So, sharp rise in fossil fuel industry delegates. Last year, there were more fossil fuel industry delegates than there were national delegates, and now it's even worse than it was before. All right. The number of delegates with links to fossil fuels at the UN Climate Summit has jumped 25% from the last meeting, analysis shared with the BBC shows. Campaign group Global Witness found that more than 600 people at the talks in Egypt are linked to fossil fuels. That's more than the combined delegations from the 10 most climate-impacted countries. Around 35,000 people are expected to attend the COP27 summit in the Red Sea resort of Sharm el-Sheikh. 35,000 people traveling to Egypt. That is a shitload of people. That is a shitload of carbon from people flying. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, again, I was bitching about this last week, Greg. I get why they want, people to meet together. That's where it's much better for people to talk in person than it is to do it online. But as a climate summit, have everyone and their fucking brother fly in to a single city from around the world is pretty anti-climate. All right. Anyhow. These conferences have always attracted significant numbers from the coal, oil, and gas industries who are keen to influence the shape of the debate. Now, to be as cranky as I am, these people should be barred from coming to these things. They should be told, fuck off, die in a fire. Don't actually, but, you can't come here. You are not welcome here. That is what should be said. At last year's summit in Glasgow, a similar analysis of official attendance lists found 503 delegates connected to fossil fuels. Got 70 from the UAE, 33 from Russia, 12 Kenya, 12 Congo, 11 Oman, 9 Kuwait, 8 Canada, 8 Angola, 3 Namibia. This year that figure has gone up to 636. COP27 looks like a fossil fuel industry trade show, says Rachel Rose Jackson from Corporate Accountability, one of a group of campaigners who released the data along with the Corporate Europe Observatory. We're on a carousel of madness here rather than climate action. The fossil fuel industry, their agenda, it's deadly. Their motivation is profit and greed. They're not serious about climate action. They never have been and they never will. Yeah, that's funny. Who'd have thunk that was a thing? Researchers counted the number of individuals registered who were either directly affiliated with fossil fuel companies or attending as members of national delegations that act on behalf of fossil fuel industry. The data shows that this year there are more fossil fuel lobbyists than total delegates from the 10 countries most impacted by climate change, including Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Mozambique. The biggest single delegation at COP27 is from the United Arab Emirates, who will host COP28 next year. They have 1,070 people on the ground here, up from 170 last year. Holy shit, it's almost 10 times the number of people. All right. The analysis found that 70 of that delegation were connected to fossil fuel extraction. Russia's delegation has 33 lobbyists for oil and gas in their delegation of 150. African lobbyists push to exploit reserves. If you're not at the table, you'll be on the menu. That's the view of Dr. Omar Farouk Ibrahim, the head of the African Petroleum Producers Organization, speaking to the BBC at COP27. Yeah, your ass should be on the menu if you're a fossil fuel person. I mean, Jesus. He said he was here to try and influence negotiators to support the development of oil and gas in Africa. He said there were 600 million people across the continent who don't have access to electricity. Okay, well, how about tidal and wave? How about solar? How about geothermal? There's lots of other options other than fucking fossil fuels. Rejects the idea that Africa should forgo its large reserves of oil and gas in exchange for renewable technology and funding from the richer nations. And this turned off again. The bitch. Alright, well, let's turn it off. We've been failed in the past, and there's no guarantee that they wouldn't fail us again, he told BBC News. Okay, well, that is fair. The Global North has completely ignored the Global South when it comes to climate change and sustainable energy, right? I mean, they from the whichever the COPs, they put together this like funding to help these other countries, and there's basically been none of that money put in there so that these other countries can help. I think there's like 300 million that they were supposed to put together to help the countries in the Global South, but I think only 100 million of it has been done. And again, like I've said, when I talk about this, if the amount of money that's being shifted over to the Global South is not in, multi-trillions, it's not going to do anything. So that, again, that's another conversation. But yes, the Global North has failed the Global South, as always, because of systemic and structural racism inherent to capitalism. Rather than being a powerful influence, Dr. Ibrahim says his group and others struggle to make an impact at the highest levels. I guarantee you, even if we are to pay to come here, they will not allow us to come because they don't want the other voice heard. There is some evidence that the arguments being made by those in favor of oil and gas are having an impact. Well, of course they are. There's been a dash for gas recently among some African nations keen to exploit their resources at a time of increased demand in Europe and elsewhere. Senegal is one of the African countries that wants to exploit its recently discovered reserves of gas. A bitch. What is important for us is how can we use these resources to develop our country and reinforce our economy and to export it to emerging and developing countries, said Idi Niang from the Senegal delegation. So the Global North could pay them, however much that is estimated to be there, pay them to keep it in the ground and then to use that to create sustainable energy. That's one way to help deal with that. But others attending were clear that the climate situation was now so serious that there should be no room at any COP for those backing fossil fuels. Preach the word, my bitches. That's exactly right. There should be no room for any of these fossil fuel predatory fucks at any of these climate talks. They should be barred. Not only should they be barred, but, not to be cruel here, but they should be, tarred and feathered and shamed for what they're doing. Just made to regret even coming near these conventions. Not that I'm bitter here. If you want to address malaria, you don't invite the mosquitoes, said Philip Jakpour, who's from Nigeria and works with Public Participation Africa. As long as we have the fossil fuel lobby and machinery in full swing, we will not make progress, and we have not made progress, he told BBC News. Yeah, and that's 100% right. 100% right. And again, as long as the predators have a seat at the table, we're not going to make any progress. So some good news there, right? Oh, fuck off, New York Times. Open. Okay, good. Here we go. All right, next one. All right, let's see what Biden has to say. I'm sure this is going to be something we can believe, and it's going to be good news, right? All right, this is from New York Times, capitalist, but we'll see what they have to say. When is this from? November 11th? This is from yesterday. All right. Biden casts America as climate leader and promises a low-carbon future. Okay. There's so much funny in here that it's ridiculous. He's living, Biden's handlers need to do a better job of keeping him under control and making sure he takes his medicine. And keeping him out of places where he speaks. This is just embarrassing. At climate talks in Egypt, President Biden apologized for his predecessor's decision to withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement. Again, climate agreement doesn't mean anything. It's nice to have your signature there, but it doesn't mean jack shit because there's no enforcement. Anyhow. All right. President Biden appeared before an overflowing United Nations convention on Friday to reclaim America's role as a leader on climate change and to stress a renewed U.S. commitment to stop the planet from catastrophic warming. I think this is very similar to Buttigieg claiming him having won that one state before they even counted. It's on that level of narcissism here. Mr. Biden came to Egypt as the president who muscled through a landmark climate law. It's not really the one that provides a record $370 billion to accelerate America's transition away from the fossil fuels that have underpinned its economy for 100 years. Okay, again, $370 billion, that doesn't fucking mean anything. If it's not multi-trillions of dollars, which is what is needed to get us off fossil fuels, shift to geothermal, shift to tidal ocean, wave, power satellites, all the other stuff, then, you're not serious. You're not talking trillions, you're not serious. At the summit known as COP27, he spoke of how he immediately returned to the United States to the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement upon taking office after his predecessor, President Donald J. Cheeto Trump, had withdrawn the country. I apologize that we ever pulled out of the agreement, he told the gathering, which comprised diplomats, ministers, and representatives of nearly 200 nations. Again, Paris Climate Agreement doesn't mean anything because it has no teeth, but it's nice. It's nice as a symbolic gesture. Mr. Biden's speech came in the midpoint of the two-week summit that has focused on so much on cutting the pollution that is driving climate change, but on the question of what, if anything, industrialized countries owe to poor nations that are suffering climate disasters for which they are ill-prepared and did little to cause. Yeah, and as we talked last week about this, that is pretty much a large part of what needs to be done. Global South, again, had very little to do with creating the problem we have today. It's mostly the United States, Britain, and Europe who have done this directly. Actually, China as well, right? China and the United States, two of the largest polluters in history, if not contemporarily. And the Global South are going to be the countries that suffer the most from it, and they don't have the infrastructure nor the money because the United States and the Global South has been looting the United States and the Global North has been looting the Global South for centuries. Yeah. For the first time, the idea of climate reparations, known in diplomatic circles as loss and damage, is on the formal agenda at the UN climate talks. For years, the United States and other wealthy nations have blocked calls for loss and damage funding. Imagine why. Concerned that it would open them up to unlimited liability, which it should. And as a legal and practical manner, it has been extraordinarily difficult to define loss and damage and determine what it might cost and who should pay how much. Okay, that is fair. Those are fair things. Because much like so instead of doing anything, they're just going to pay off those countries. Well, It has to be both, like I talk about, right? These countries don't have the money to invest in geothermal and all these other things. They just don't have the money, and because they don't have the money to do these more expensive sustainable energy, then they go to, like they're talking about, fossil fuels. So it's not so much about paying them off. It's about, the global north has been looting these countries for hundreds of years and is also primarily responsible for the climate change that we have today. So we need to make sure that they have the money to make the changes that they need to make in the global south so they can prepare or mitigate the damage from climate change, and to make sure that, again, how their countries are working isn't also increasing climate change, right? Like I talk about my policies, right? We give them trillions of dollars so they shift to first world country, and have them shift to sustainable energy so they can skip the fossil fuel era. That's, every part that we can work towards reducing the increase in greenhouse gases is going to be a good thing. In the United States, global north is responsible for most of it, so we need to help them get there. But not only that, our United States has to do something as well, much like I talk about here, right? In for our policy, trillions needs to be sent to the global south, but also the individual countries in the global north need to be setting trillions to fix their own issues. Like here in the United States, right? Biden said he did like 300 billion again for the United States. That's nothing. Again, if he's not putting $2 to $3, $4, $5 trillion towards shifting to sustainable energy in the United States, it's not doing anything. So we have to help the global south, but we also have to help ourselves as well. And our countries, the global north, is the global north going to stop? Well, right, and that's part of the thing, right? We have to make sure the global north, which is responsible for the majority of it, is going to reduce how much greenhouse gases they're putting out. Shift to sustainable energy, reduce plastics, right? And, whatever other things there are there. Increase efficiency. Oh, no, right. The global north isn't going to. You're right. They're not going to. I mean, that's because capitalism, right? There's no money to be made in saving humanity from extinction, right? What I'm talking about is what they should be doing, but they're not going to, right? Because the global north isn't going to do loss and damages because there's no profit in doing that. The global north isn't going to spend the time, especially the United States, increasing efficiencies, shifting to sustainable energy, looking for regenerative processes and all that sort of thing, because there's no money to be made in it. I mean, they're the corporate owners of people in Congress. They don't want to spend that money because there's no short-term profit. Of course, the things that I talk about is what should be done, but of course will never be done. So, we can talk about it and we can see if they do or don't do it. They won't. Not to be completely doomer here. Okay. But this week, leaders of several European countries said they supported the creation of Loss and Damage Fund and made cash pledges, putting pressure on Americans. This is awesome. Bet you it'll be some of the democratic socialist countries, Finland, Sweden, and those. Probably one of the several that put money in for this. I'll be curious to see who it is and how much, right? Again, if it's not, if each country isn't putting several, 100 billion or more in there, it's not enough. Mr. Biden visited Egypt as part of a foreign relations trip that also includes stops in Cambodia and Indonesia, where he's expected to meet with President Xi Jinping from China during a gathering of the Group of 20. Climate activists and diplomats are hoping that the men who represent the world's two largest economies, as well as the two biggest greenhouse gas emitters, might restart discussions about working together on climate action. Okay, that would be good. China suspended those talks in August out of anger over Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. Okay, yep. During his remarks at the COP27, Mr. Biden made no mention of climate reparations. Of course not. That disappointed some activists and diplomats, particularly from developing nations who view it as a matter of justice. Yep. fundamentally about who is most responsible, said Fatima Denton, a Gambian scholar, longtime UN official, and member of Climate Crisis Advisory Group. There's a solidarity issue here that's only going to become bigger as the crisis grows. Support for that idea is needed now. 100% agree. Mr. Biden mentioned recent climate disasters that had caused misery and destruction in every part of the globe, explaining that no one was safe from the threat posed by a warming Earth and that collective action was the only way to face the crisis. Yeah, again, he'll talk good because it looks good, but then he won't actually do anything. Again, that's what Democrats do, right? They talk a good game, but then they don't do it because that's not what they're paid to do. He exhorted other nations to follow America's lead and increase their efforts to make swift and deep cuts to the pollution that is driving climate change. That is laughable. The United States is acting. Everyone has to act, Mr. Biden said. It's a duty and a responsibility of global leadership. Countries that are in a position to help should be supporting developing countries so they can make decisive climate decisions. So if the United States was serious about this, they would have already pledged what, $500 billion at least to this loss and damages thing. The United States would have said they were going to end all subsidies to fossil fuels. They said they were going to increase taxes on agricorps, especially those who are doing clear cutting and cows for food. They would be acting on setting laws to increase efficiencies and taxing pollution. But he's not going to do any of the stuff that actually is needed. Racing forward to do our part to avert climate hell that the UN Secretary General so passionately warned about earlier this week, he said. He reiterated a 2021 pledge to provide $11.4 billion annually by 2024 to help developing countries transition to wind, solar, and other renewable energy. Again, $11.4 billion is nothing. It's nothing. Again, if we're talking $500 billion, needs to be the beginning point, and this is, it's 50 times less than what you should be talking. I mean, as a starting point. And it shouldn't be by 2024. It should be $500 billion like this year, by the end of the year, and then $500 billion next year as a starting point for the conversation. Anything other than that is just fucking laughable. Here's your tokens. Now go away. That money, which is different from a loss and damage fund, was promised by wealthy nations under the 2015 Paris Agreement, right? Which they haven't met any of those. Last year, Mr. Biden secured just $1 billion toward that goal from Congress, which is nothing. Mr. Biden noted that the new climate law in the United States would propel progress in batteries, hydrogen, and other technology, and would encourage a cycle of innovation that would reduce costs, improve performance, and benefit the world. We're going to help make the transition to a low-carbon future more affordable for everyone, he said. Well, right, sure. But by when? 2050? If he's not aiming to be carbon negative by 2030, there's no, I don't want to say there's no point, but there's basically no point, because we have to be carbon negative globally by 2030, or we are so beyond fucked it's not even funny. Because the time it takes for changes in the environment, in the ecosystem, to actually get around the world and to see that drop is going to take time. It might take decades. Or even if we were like carbon negative today, it still might take decades for us to feel that in the environment as it gets through the environment and the ecosystem, and to feel it globally. It doesn't happen instantly. It takes time for the ecosystem and everything to adjust to these changes. For the first time, Mr. Biden announced the U.S. government will require domestic oil and gas producers to detect and fix leaks of methane, a greenhouse gas that traps about 80 times as much heat as carbon dioxide does in the short run. The fossil fuel industry is the biggest industrial source of methane emissions in the United States. The odorless gas leaks from pipelines and is often intentionally vented by gas producers. Stopping methane from escaping into the atmosphere is critical to slowing global warming, scientists say. Okay, so he's going to require that they fix it. Okay, by when? Okay, I mean, it's important to do that, but, big fucking deal. Is he getting rid of the subsidies towards fossil fuels? Is he ending all of the permits for gas and oil wherever they have them on federal land? Is he increasing taxes on them? Is he fining them for these? No, he's not. This is again, doesn't mean anything. It's a token to make us shut up saying, see, I did something. Doesn't mean anything. Doesn't fucking mean anything. The fossil fuel industry is the biggest industrial source of methane emissions in the United States. I just read that. Yes. Stopping methane from escaping into the atmosphere is critical to slowing global warming, scientists say. Yeah, and another part of this is, of course, with everything warming, the permafrost in the Arctic and Alaska and Siberia and those areas are thawing, which is releasing methane that's trapped in the ice from there, which is a big problem. And again, even if we were carbon today, that resource, that overshoot, the time it takes for being carbon negative is going to take decades to feel it, and that methane is still going to be coming out, which might create an autocatalytic self-reinforced cycle that may run away, and then we may not ever be able to stop. Last year, the United States and Europe led a coalition of more than 100 countries that agreed to cut 30% of methane emissions by 2030. 30%? Again, you're not cutting it all by 2030, then what's the point? Despite that pledge, methane emissions this year are rising faster than ever before. According to a report by the World Meteorological Organization, Mr. Biden urged other nations to make good on their promises. Tell you what, fuckface, we'll think about meeting ours if you decide to meet yours. Some negotiators praised Mr. Biden's determination to aggressively confront climate change, particularly after Mr. Trump essentially suspended federal efforts for 4 years. Mr. Biden received Jim Crow Dementia Joe received sustained applause for saying that if governments can finance coal, they can finance renewable energy. True statement. And the crowd gave him standing ovation at the end of his marks, and they should have been yelling expletives at him like hypocrite, liar. Ayman El-Gohari, an Egyptian delegate, said he found Mr. Biden's explanation of how the new American climate law will help drive down the cost of energy exciting, but misleading. Joe Biden, in my book, is a genuine climate hero. Who the fuck said this? Said former Vice President Al Gore. Give me a fucking break, dude. During an interview at the Climate Talks on Thursday. Come on, how much have you sold out to say that? Again, Democrats talk a good game, but they don't actually do what needs to be done. In the scope of saving humanity from extinction in the next 200 years, Dementia Joe hasn't done jack shit. Gaming Mine, how you doing, man? We're doing climate doomerism. Yay! Talking COP27. Here's the first one. And here's the one we're reading right now. What's it like in Germany? That's what I've been saying. Joe has not only done jack shit, he's made everything worse. Yep, true statement. That's what I'm bitching about here. That's right. Maybe I should change my channel name to Doomer News, huh? That's probably going to be much more accurate so people know what they're getting into. Yep. I guess here it's been 30s, 20s and 30s. Yeah, I might have to do that. Change my YouTube channel to that. I just changed my handle to Free Xenon for YouTube, which was cool. Maybe I can change it over to Doomer News. That'd be good marketing. And very appropriate. I'll think about that. I'm gonna write that down. I did finish the book Moneyless Society by Matt from the Moneyless Society podcast. Finished that today, and then I'll be reading David Graeber's book, The Dawn of Everything, New History of Humanity starting this next week, because this is my birthday week. Starting tomorrow, I'll be reading it. It's like 700 pages of goodness. Yeah, it's going to be a good book. I'm really excited about it because David Graeber's awesome, and from what I've heard about David Wengrow, he's pretty cool too. It's going to be a good read. It's going to be a good learning experience, and it's going to very well jive with what I've been researching and kind of writing about in my humanity's journey from abundance to scarcity and back again. It'll fit quite well into that stuff. All right, let's see. In Mr. Biden's speech, he spoke of the long struggle to pass climate law, noting that he introduced legislation more than 30 years ago as a senator to address what was then a looming crisis. I would like a fact check on that. Finally said today, I can stand here as President of the United States of America and say with confidence the United States will meet its emissions targets by 2030. Yeah, I don't think that's going to be a thing. I guess we'll see, right? 7 more years? But the summit also showcased something that Mr. Biden and his administration are increasingly discovering, that even as world leaders welcome American re-engagement on the issue, their expectations for U.S. action have swelled. Well, if their expectations are nothing was going to happen, okay, all right, and expecting something to happen, I think we're all going to be disappointed, but I guess we'll see. Guaranteeing that whatever it is that they are choosing to do isn't going to meet the level of the crisis that we face, of course. Amara Nwuneli, a 15-year-old activist from Lagos, Nigeria, said she thought Mr. Biden's speech was disappointing. Boom, drop the truth. He talked about the things America accomplished, but he made it feel like they've done enough, she said, and there's so much more to be done. Yeah, girlfriend. Drop it. Mr. Biden was the only leader of a major polluting country to appear at the climate talks in Egypt. Mr. Xi, President Vladimir Putin of Russia, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India did not attend. The absence of the other leaders made Mr. Biden even more of a target for developing nations that were aggrieved. Yeah, okay. That's the most powerful northern nations aren't going to attend and get targeted like this, because especially when loss and whatever is on the menu. Some of the assembled negotiators and environmental activists criticized Mr. Biden ahead of his speech. Protesters briefly interrupted it. Okay, cool. Joe Biden comes to COP27, makes new promises, but his old promises have not even been fulfilled, said Mohammed Adal, the founder of PowerShift Africa, an environmental group, after Mr. Biden gave his remarks. He's like a salesman selling goods with endless small print. Yeah. Mr. Biden's stop at the summit was over almost as soon as it began. He landed in Egypt mid-afternoon after flying overnight from Washington, then spent about 3 hours on the ground, meeting with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi of Egypt and raising topics including the importance of human rights and respect for fundamental freedoms. White House official said, the United States is one of the largest abusers of human rights in the world. After the track record of Biden keeping his promises, his word is not really worth a lot. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's pretty much what everyone should be saying. I mean, it's laughable that he's saying anything and not just getting embarrassed, shamed just for even deigning to show up. I mean, it's just ridiculous. After delivering his 23-minute speech, he boarded Air Force One for a second overnight flight to Phnom Penh, Cambodia, to attend a meeting of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations before traveling on to Bali, Indonesia, for the Group of 20 gathering. Yeah, he flies in there just enough to give a speech and then fly out so that he can't be attacked and held responsible for the complete hypocrisy and systemic and structural violence inflicted upon the world, especially those in the global south. I think I wonder if the U.S. delegation, if the U.S. has a delegation beyond Biden showing up. I haven't mentioned that yet, because I know Abby Martin tackled Nancy Pelosi last year with an amazing question about the U.S. military, which was awesome. But they're probably trying to limit that sort of a thing this year. Cowards. Board Air Force One to Cambodia. Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, said Mr. Biden had pressed for the release of Egyptian political prisoners, including Allah Abdel El Fattah, the British Egyptian prisoner, whose hunger and water strike this week has overshadowed the summit. We're doing everything we can to secure their release, Mr. Sullivan said. While in Egypt, Mr. Biden announced Okay. Officials from over 16 agencies. Okay, Albright, Blinken, Podesta. Okay, so they got some people going there. All right, good. Thank you. So they have people going there. Hopefully they get tackled by some good questions from the public. We'll see. Another week left, I think. Yep, another week left. While in Egypt, Mr. Biden announced modest new steps to build on the tax incentives and government spending programs in the climate law known as Inflation Reduction Act, which is designed to speed the adoption of electric vehicles as well as transition to wind, solar, and other cleaner energy sources. Now again, much like we bitch about Musk, I mean, there's plenty of reasons to bitch about Musk. We shouldn't be shifting to electric vehicles. We should be shifting to sustainable mass transportation, trains, buses, and that sort of a thing. Wind and solar is okay, but it has the intermittency issue and it also requires the use of batteries, which is also a problem. So again, pushing for geothermal, tidal, wave, stream, and power satellites and things of that nature, powerful baseload sustainable energy. Instead of giving more money, instead of greenwashing it. One of the law's provisions threatens fines of up to $1,500 per ton of methane released. Oh, okay, so he's got fines. Okay, that's a good thing. Be imposed against the worst polluters, but there is also $1.55 billion in the package aimed at helping companies avoid those fines by pouring money into upgrading equipment to monitor and contain leaks. So the issue with fines is, I mean, they can just write off the pollution, right? Much like they're doing now. Fines for pollution just means that it's just another tax that they have to pay. If it's not like the staggering fee, like $1 million per ton, where they're paying billions and billions. I mean, every company's paying billions and billions for the tonnage that they leak. And if there isn't very active levels of monitoring by the government to hold them accountable, then it doesn't really mean much. It's just something they write off on their taxes. Big deal. The rule proposed by the EPA includes a new provision the administration called the Super Emitter Response Program, which would require oil and gas operators to respond to credible third-party reports, again, that their sites were experiencing major methane leaks. Cost of doing business, exactly right. That's exactly right. Just another line that they just write off. So, yeah, this is the issue here, that it's third-party reports, and the government itself was not doing the monitoring aggressively. Again, the EPA should have been given hundreds of billions of dollars to have the resources to take care of this themselves, as well as working with third-party reports. This bill not having done that shows how not serious they are about enforcing this. Control of Congress, which is still uncertain after this week's midterm elections, could complicate any hope Mr. Biden has of passing additional climate legislation, including funding to fulfill America's climate commitments to developing nations. Oh yeah, so I think Republicans took the House, but we gained some seats in the Senate, I think. So, he came here and said these things, but he knew that most likely there was going to be some changes due to the midterms and that we weren't going to be able to do anything, right? So it's easy to say all this stuff, but knowing full well that we're not going to do anything because, again, we're going to say, oh, Republicans bad. It's the Republicans' fault that we can't do anything. Ah, geez. even though they could have done all of this in the previous 2 years. They could have codified Roe versus Wade. They could have passed this giant ass Green New Deal bill. They could have done lots of things, but they chose not to. If Republicans win control of one or both chambers of Congress, they're unlikely to support such spending. No shit, Sherlock. Democratic lawmakers who traveled to Egypt for the summit acknowledged that any new climate efforts, including moves to cut more emissions or secure more funding for developing countries, would be challenging. It's going to be very hard to get it done, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island said. Yeah, and all the stuff that I've been talking about that we need to be doing, they could have done in the previous 2 years to show that they were serious, but they didn't. Particularly when it comes to funding to help poor countries transition to clean energy or cope with the consequences of climate change, we can't get 60 votes for those issues, Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland said. The opposition was underscored on Friday by Representative Greg Murphy, Republican of North Carolina, one of 6 House Republicans who traveled to Egypt for the summit. He said that Democrats were trying to shift away from fossil fuels too quickly. No, fuckerhead, they're not doing it quick enough. Imperiling American growth and leaving the United States at disadvantage to China. Bullshit. Too bad that's your... Yeah, well, exactly, that's your fucking job. Jesus. So this is bullshit. This is just fear-mongering bullshit. It's just bullshit. We're not shifting away from fossil fuels quickly enough. We should be off fossil fuels now. We should be on sustainable energy now. And... oh, what was that? Okay. The return on investment of shifting to sustainable energy, right? We would make it back in like 6 years. You read this a few months ago, right? Give China a massive advantage by being far ahead into green tech. Exactly! That's exactly right. I mean, it's laughable. These fucking Republicans, it just drives me nuts. How intellectually dishonest they are. Where is it? Where fucking is it? Can't afford... here we go. Money back in 6 years. There we go. I'll go ahead and say this, share this again. Yeah, it'll cost $62 trillion. I think this is globally, but we'll save $11 trillion in annual energy cost savings, and we'll make all that money back in 6 years. It's fucking Republicans. Fossil fuels built the world, Mr. Murphy, a former surgeon, said, and will bankrupt the world and starve the world if we make a transition that is too fast. No, we fucking won't, because we'll have made the transition, you fucking idiot. Oh my god. Also, China has a massive advantage already because they have an efficient response to COVID pandemic. Yep, so they don't have to deal with the mass disabling event that leads to a gap in the workforce. And also, they are also aren't they one of the world's leaders in solar tech as well? Because they're making most of it. I mean, they're so far ahead of us in so many ways. It's embarrassing. I mean, any American representative should be embarrassed to go out. Yeah, I think they are. I think they are. But yeah, if you find that, let me know. We'll see what the leaders are. Yeah, the American representatives should be embarrassed to go outside. They really should be. Okay, this is some Reuters from today. Some countries have resisted 1.5 degree goal in COP27 text, UN says. Article 2016 already cites China as leader in solar. Okay, there we go. Yeah, exactly. Just like you said, right? That we're... okay, go back up here. Yeah, by shifting to sustainable energy, we become a leader in green tech. That's too bad. I mean, we have to catch up to China by shifting to sustainable energy. So I can't understand why they're resisting the 1.5 degree goal. I mean, part of it's we're never going to get there. We can't even get to the 1.2 set in the Paris Agreement. All right. Sharm el Sheikh, Egypt, November 12th. Reuters. A few countries have resisted mentioning global goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius in the official text of the COP27 summit in Egypt. Egypt U.S. Special Climate Envoy John Kerry said at the conference on Saturday. Oh, fuck yourself, John Kerry. You're absolutely correct. There are very few countries, but a few that have raised the issue of not mentioning this word or that word, Kerry said when asked about opposition by some governments to mentioning the 1.5 degree target. They've already mentioned it. American exceptionalism. Yeah. It's embarrassing. It's just, it is such a, it creates so much harm in America and our political discourse by the people on the right specifically, where American exceptionalism is a big thing, but it's still a part of the general populace and our propagandizing that we are the best country in the world and all that stupid bullshit. But thinking America is the best at everything makes sure that we don't make any actual progress towards solving any of the problems, because we're already awesome. It has a similar cooling effect as religion kind of does as well. Because why would I, do anything because God has made me, wants this to happen? God wants me to be this suffering, then why should I even try to fix anything? Very similar to American exceptionalism. We're already awesome at this, so there's nothing really to do. But the fact is that in Glasgow, that was adopted, the language is there, and I know Egypt doesn't intend to be the country that hosts a retreat from what was achieved in Glasgow. Okay, so this is last year, 1.5 was set. Kerry said, referring to last year's COP summit in Scotland. World governments agreed in 2015 during a UN summit in France. Okay, so this is in the Paris Climate, so it was the Paris Climate Agreement where they to try to limit the average global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius, a deal dubbed the Paris Agreement that was seen as a breakthrough in international climate ambition. Greenhouse gas emissions have been rising ever since, however, and scientists say the world risks missing the target without swift and deep cuts. Reaching the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold risks unleashing the worst consequences of global warming. We're already headed to almost a 4-degree increase by 2100. Again, if we are not carbon negative today, this year, it's going to take decades before we'll see the benefits of any changes as the changes get through to the ecology and through the entire global system. We're already starting to see some of the horrors, right? Pakistan got flooded. And other countries are seeing flooding and droughts and all sorts of things. It's just going to get worse and worse over these next decade. And it's just going to get so much more horrible. And the global north isn't going to sit and do anything. They're not going to do anything about it. Not on the scale that needs to be done. Limiting it to 1.5 degrees Celsius is effectively voting for millions of people to die. Vote for climate refugees, it's a vote for drought, it's a vote for lots of horrible things to be inflicted on people of this country, of this world. It's psychopathic. Already, the world has swarmed more than 1.1 degrees Celsius from the pre-industrial average temperature, fueling extreme weather that is already delivering steep economic losses. Many developing countries have demanded the establishment of a loss and damage fund, talked about earlier, that could disperse cash to countries struggling to cover from disasters. As we read in the previous article, the United States is going to throw $11 billion towards this thing, but again, if the United States isn't starting with $500 billion, it's laughable. $11 billion isn't going to do anything of any large-scale consequence that's going to matter in saving humanity from extinction. Kerry said the United States would not support establishing such a fund, and instead believed existing platforms should be used. Of course. Again, like they talked about earlier, that in the previous article, that is, if they establish something like that, then it's tantamount to the country supporting it. It's tantamount to admitting that they are the problem. That opens it up to lawsuits and all sorts of other crazy stuff, which they don't want to do. Instead of being preemptive, instead of being proactive and trying to do their part, they'd rather not do anything. It's a well-known fact that the United States and many other countries will not establish some sort of legal structure that is tied to compensation or liability. That's just not happening, he said. Right, exactly. Heavens forbid we take responsibility. We will find a way, I'm confident, to be able to have financial arrangements that reflect the reality of how we are all going to deal with the climate crisis. No, you won't, you lying sack of shit. Again, it's not 500 billion. At the very beginning, it doesn't matter. The numbers that they should be talking is, here's $1 trillion. $1 trillion every year for the next, as long as it takes to save us from humanity. And every country, every first world country needs to be doing that. Democratic lawmakers spent the last few days at the summit trying to bolster the U.S. commitment to its climate goals and reassure countries that Washington would deliver on promises pledged at previous climate summits. They touted the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act in Congress, which unleashed over $300 billion in climate-related domestic spending, nowhere near enough. They added they would push to pass legislation allowing Biden to deliver the $11.4 billion in a climate finance pledge he made at the Glasgow climate talks last year. Again, $11 billion is nothing. The task could be complicated in a politically divided Congress. Congressman John Curtis, Republican from Utah, who's leading a delegation of Republicans at the summit, told Reuters that he opposed climate aid. Of course he does, you sociopathic fuckhead. The U.S. writing a check won't solve problems. Yes, it will, you stupid motherfucker. It's like, those of us who aren't already affluent and rich, right? Money will solve most of my problems. They will. I mean, give me plenty of money and most of my problems are going to be solved. That's just the way it is. Majority of the population of the world is currently living in poverty. Money will help them a shitload. Said he supported policies that expand production and access to natural gas and the development of clean energy source technologies. What? Okay, there's that one. We have... Maybe we'll reduce some of these here. Maybe we won't read all of these. As long as this one. They won't do what is necessary. They won't put out money to help those countries that are affected, but they will do... But what they will do is send our corporations to do the work. So, yes, yeah, exactly right. Yeah, if there's no way for corporations to benefit from it, then nothing is going to be done. It's either profit or they're not going to do it, because that's what capitalism is. Profit, no matter the cost. I don't know if I want to keep going through all of these that I found. The Reuters one. Okay, how many more of these do you guys want to go through? I have 3 more. 3 more just on COP. I think we've... Okay, this is just talking about loss and claims again. Good stuff in there, but we've heard all of that already. 3 more, it's a lot. Okay, yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. We've already gone through 3, and it's covered most of it, everything that we're probably going to hear in all of these. Okay, so let's drop this one. All right, we'll drop this one. Anything new in here? Okay, this one isn't too long. We'll go through this one real quick. And that will be it. All right. Oh, you want them in the chat? Ooh, I deleted it. Open it up. Open it. Okay, these are the. Oh, and there's the other one. All right, and then. All right, we'll go through this one. And we'll move on. This one's pretty short. Okay. This is from yesterday. New York Times, so, take it with a grain of salt. After decades of resistance, rich countries offer direct climate aid. Several European leaders at COP27 announced funds to help poor nations recover from loss and damage caused by climate change. The United States was silent. Yes, they were. Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. For 30 years, developing nations have been calling for industrialized countries to provide compensation for the costs of devastating storms and droughts caused by climate change. For just as long, rich nations that have generated the pollution that is dangerously heating the planet have resisted those calls. At the United Nations Climate Summit last year, only Scotland, the host country, committed $2.2 million for what is known as loss and damage. But this week, the dam may have begun to break. $2.2 million? On Sunday, negotiators from developing countries succeeded in placing the matter on the formal agenda of this year's climate summit, known as COP27, or the 27th session of the Conference of Parties. The addition of loss and damage on the agenda is a significant achievement and one that we have been fighting for many years. Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, said on Tuesday, "We have a moral and just cause." Yes, you do. By the end of the third day of the conference, several European countries had pledged cash for a new loss and damage fund. God. The First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, appeared at a New York Times event on the sidelines of COP27 after promising an additional $5.7 million. 5.7 million isn't anything. My God. The Global South still feel that they are having to come and plead with the rich countries to acknowledge, let alone address the issue of loss and damage. For example, Ms. Sturgeon said, there's a real need to make tangible progress. It's exactly right. And that's much like we've talked about COP26 in this, that if loss and damage is going to be a major issue, a lot of the global north countries just won't come, and nothing, they'll just avoid it so they don't have to deal with it. But it's a necessary thing. Loss and damage has to be done. Again, United States needs to drop $1 trillion in there. Britain needs to drop $1 trillion in there. Europe and other countries need to drop trillions in there, and that's what's needed. The commitment of direct funding for loss and damage represents a major break from the precedent. For decades, wealthy nations, which have emitted half of the heat-trapping gases since 1850, avoided calls to help poor countries recover from climate disasters, fearing that doing so could open them to unlimited liability. Yep. And as a legal and practical matter, it has been extraordinarily difficult to define loss and damage and determine what it might cost and who might pay. Did we just read this? No, I didn't. Okay, good. Yet after increasingly destructive fires, floods, and droughts, which have touched every corner of the globe, but have disproportionately affected the developing world, Western leaders have changed their tune. On Tuesday, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, endorsed the idea of new funds for poor nations being affected by climate change. COP must make progress on minimizing and averting loss and damage from climate change, she said, addressing other world leaders. It's high time to put this on the agenda. Shortly after Ms. von der Leyen's remarks, Prime Minister Michael Martin of Ireland said his country was pledging $10 million to a new effort to protect the most vulnerable from climate loss and damage. The burden of climate change globally is falling most heavily on those least responsible for our predicament, he said. We will not see the change we need without climate justice. Right, and we won't see the change needed unless we have justice. But again, this is the systemic and structural racism inherent to capitalism. This is that systemic racism on geopolitical scales. The global south is suffering for the abuses that the global north has done, and the global north isn't going to give reparations for the harm. And again, the scale on which the world needs to be looking at is much like we looked at NEOM last year. Every single one of these countries in Africa and the global south need to be building one of these, not the Lion City, but a city on that scale to start housing their people and doing the research. Again, so every country in the north needs to be dropping $1 trillion so that those countries can be doing that. Austria's climate minister said the country would pay 50 million euros, or around 50 million, to developing countries struggling with climate effects. Okay, so it's how many countries? We're starting with 100 countries? So that'll be good. I doubt that. Belgium joined in, promising 2.5 million loss and damage funding to Mozambique. Denmark said in September that it would spend at least 13 million paying for loss and damage in developing nations. This is fucking anemic. This is ridiculous. This is insulting. 13 million, 2.5 million. I know, this is just... Okay, so when we're looking at Europe, we do have to take into account the European Union as a whole, right? Because each of the individual countries don't have their own currency, so they can't just do what they want. This really needs... the European Union has to vote collectively to send trillions there to the global south. So yeah, so it's a little bit different for Europe because they don't have their own currency individually for each country. But still, I mean, it's still nothing. They should be... What should be done here is for COP27, do other rich countries have available funds? Well, PAYGO needs to go. PAYGO is an artificial limitation that is basically tying our hands. The United States could just pass a law saying, hey, we're going to drop $1 trillion in this fund, and then the money would be there. There's no problems. PAYGO says that when Congress passes a bill, it has to be offset by appropriate amount of taxes, which is harmful because any spending, if we have spending which ends up being taxed or ends up being neutral or having a surplus of tax revenue to the government, ends up with a recession. Police CEO Rick scores big pay bump. Yeah, and this... Fucking capitalism. It's so infuriating. Okay, wait. You said price got life saving. Okay, which okay. Which medicine? Where is it? Drug maker. Let's see. Blah, 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 blah. So this is the guy who must have replaced Martin Shkreli, right? Oh my god. That's horrific. It's bad. I mean... You only do spending in the annual budget or when emergencies. Right. So they can spend the money that they've budgeted for, and using PAYGO and the bird rule, and there's a few other rules that have to go away. But they don't normally have... Technically, they don't have to. But they have these artificial limits in place which they allow to be there so that they don't end up doing the sorts of things that they need to be doing. So they can say, oh, it's the bird rule. Oh, it's the PAYGO. Why we can't do things when it's not... doesn't need to be there. They choose to be there. Okay. So yeah, but if the United States wanted to, they could pass the law for $1 trillion for loss and damages, and then it would be there. It's really that simple. Germany made a related move on Monday with Chancellor Olaf Scholz pledging 170 million to a new program that would offer vulnerable nations a form of insurance in the event of climate emergencies. Wasn't Clinton that did that? The PAYGO rule? I don't know. I don't know when those were enacted. That's a good question. $1990. That sounds like a Clinton thing. Let's just do this. Oh, it's Bush. That was Bush for PAYGO. It looks like. When was Clinton? Clinton, 93 to 2001. That was Bush. Naturally. All right. Germany made a related move on Monday with Chancellor Olaf Scholz pledging 170 million to a new program that would offer vulnerable nations a form of insurance in the event of climate emergency. Okay, so Germany, again with Europe, they have to budget for this because they don't have their own currency. So it's something, but still, it needs to be done on a EU scale. Other leaders said the time has come for real loss and damage funding. I support governments paying money for loss and damage and adaptation, but let's be very clear that's a matter of billions or tens of billions, Al Gore, former vice president of the United States, said on Monday. Al Gore, go fuck yourself, dude. It's not about billions or tens of billions, it's about trillions of dollars per country. Shortly after Mr. Gore spoke, President Emmanuel Macron of France said that Europe was already helping poorer countries and that other Western nations needed to do more. Europeans are paying, he said. We are the only ones paying. Maybe pressure must be on rich non-European countries, telling them you have to pay your fair share, Mr. Macron said in a not too veiled reference to the Americans. But I imagine that Europe isn't paying what it needs to be paying. I think it's done on a country by country basis, not through the EU as a whole. But the United States, the world's richest nation and the largest emitter of greenhouse gases in historical terms, was conspicuously absent from the discussions on loss and damage. Of course. John Kerry, President Biden's climate envoy, has agreed to discuss the idea of financing for loss and damage at the climate conference, but the United States has not agreed to a new fund. You're anxious to see the loss and damage issue dealt with up front and in a real way at the COP, a spokesman for Mr. Kerry said as the conference began. Need to go now, but it's informative and fun. Okay, great, man. Have a great weekend. Stay COVID free. Get some sleep. Get some real sleep. And we'll see you later, man. Good to see you. Thanks for stopping by. We anticipate that it will be an agenda item, and we're perfectly comfortable helping it to be that, which means at some point you got to have an outcome. Still, no strategy was offered on Tuesday by the United States delegation. Instead, Mr. Kerry plans to unveil on Wednesday a new plan designed to get big corporations to purchase carbon offsets. They're fucking useless. Essentially credits for the greenhouse gas pollution. The money would go toward driving down emissions in developing nations by retiring fossil fuel plants, creating renewable energy, and building resilience to climate effects. Oh, and I found a new battery that I want to go over too. We'll do that in a little while. The initiative has been met with skepticism from some European nations, as well as members of the UN Secretary General staff, because they felt the plan lacked details and was being rushed, according to multiple people familiar with the discussions. Some of the most influential environmental groups in the United States, who were briefed by the State Department on the strategy, including the Natural Resources Defense Council and the World Resource Institute, also do not support the plan because they fear it could actually undermine efforts to drive down global emissions to zero. Activists said, right, because carbon offsets don't do anything. They're a fucking waste. Again, it's a way because big companies can buy the offsets from the smaller companies, and then anything else they can just write a fucking check for and not worry about it. They just write it off. The mixed efforts by Western nations came as leaders from developing countries continued to call for financial compensation. We need to put together the loss and damage fund we have been speaking about for years, President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela said. During a fiery speech, he denounced capitalism and the extraction of natural resources as the cause of climate change. Preach, brother, but made no mention of his own country's history as an oil producer. Yep. Kasia Natano, the Prime Minister of Tuvalu. What the fuck is this? Is this a country? I mean, there's lots of little small countries out there, but I never heard of this. Tuvalu became independent from the United Kingdom in 1978. It's a constitutional monarchy with a 15-member unicameral parliament elected every 4 years. Okay, where the fuck is it? I mean, it could be any... Well, no, hold on. Let's not do this. Oh, wait. Where are they? Hold on. Oh, Tonga? What's this tiny-ass island? Here? Okay, it's off Australia over here. Super tiny. Here's Fiji. Tonga, American Samoa. Okay, so it's over here. Okay. You didn't know this was a country. Here you go. Tuvalu, okay. Said his nation was the Pacific region's champion of loss and damage and called for a secure, guaranteed loss and damage facility. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan detailed the continuing recovery following extraordinary floods this summer that killed an estimated 1,700 people and left 1/3 of his country underwater. This all happened despite our very low carbon footprint, he said. Loss and damage needs to be part of the core agenda of COP27. Agreed. And again, when you're looking at like what happened in Pakistan, 1/3 of the country is underwater. Part of the way we need to approach this is every single country needs to do climate modeling to figure out, what's going to happen with climate change. Where's the harm going to be? And then either reset up your entire country's infrastructure to compensate for that, or preferably for me, build brand new cities from the ground up to put your people in and can deal with the climate. And you can't, not doing anything and having to deal with it after people have already died and your infrastructure is destroyed that's not useful. It's doing it after the fact, and after the trauma is hit, damage is already done. And of course, the United States doesn't care, nor does the global north, because they're not the ones who have to deal with it. The global south that has to suffer the most, or the global north's significant majority pollution. And Cleopas Dlamini, the Prime Minister of Eswatini, previously known as Swaziland, said countries like his were having such a hard time recovering from one climate disaster that it was getting difficult to prepare for the next one. We have to come to a point where the urgency to mitigate and adapt is being overshadowed by the need to deal with the loss and damage we are already facing and experiencing, Mr. Dlamini said, hence the need for a loss and damage financing facility. Right. And yeah, once they get hit with something, then they're already behind. Harry's fine with paying carbon offsets, so why not increase those amounts and send to the fund? You could. You very much could, but again, it would have to be, the fines would have to be huge. Otherwise, it's something, but it's not anywhere near what needs to be done. Again, if you set it so that there were trillions of dollars coming from these countries, from the fossil fuel industries to do that, oh sure, I would be all for that. Carbon offset the shit out of them, but it's not going to be done like that. It's going to be done at such a small level that it's just something that they write off. They trade, the big companies trade with smaller companies, and then they don't worry about it. It has to be done on the level of the scale of the crisis that we face, which is never going to be done. But sure, they could definitely do that. They could definitely do that. And I would support that if it was done at the appropriate scale. Other African leaders made similar remarks, emphasizing that their countries could not afford the cost of adapting to climate change, or mitigating extreme weather disasters. Right, and it takes trillions of dollars to do this. When asked on Tuesday if the delegates from nearly 200 nations would end the 2-week conference with an agreement on a loss and damage fund, Mr. Sturgeon of Scotland was skeptical despite her country's pledge. I'd like to say yes, she said, but I think realistically, probably not. I hope I'm wrong about that, but I do think it's really important that we emerge from these 2 weeks with something tangible and concrete that people can see the end point to an agreement. Whatever they agree to isn't going to be anything that's going to make a difference. Planning to help the most vulnerable nations, she said, would represent a moral failure on the part of the West. We are. This is a really fundamental question of climate justice, she said. The rich world has a responsibility here. True. All right. There you go. That's one. That's the last one there. All right. So this, I looked over this just a little bit, and this looks really interesting about Shell. All right. Any questions or comments on COP27 and the hypocrisy of the global north and the end of humanity as we know it? This is from 2017, so this is a little bit old, but it's still pretty interesting. And then we'll get into some tech stuff. Let me search for that battery thing, which I found pretty interesting. Brick batteries. Here we go.
Lithium-ion batteries.
Nope. All right. Any questions? Before we move on. COP27 goodiness. Ugh. This one is a little bit long, but it's got some very interesting information on Shell and their how they've dealt with climate change. So buckle in. Once we get through this, then we'll get some sustainable tech and some other stuff. All right. So again, this is from 2017. Shell's 1991 warning: climate changing at faster rate than any time since end of ice age. Shell said this in 91. The year before I graduated. Critics say public information film shows Shell understood the threat was dire, potentially existential for civilization, more than a quarter of a century ago. Climate change, at a rate faster than any time since the end of the Ice Age, changed too fast perhaps for life to adapt without severe dislocation. That was the startling warning issued by the oil giant Shell more than a quarter century ago. The company's far-sighted 1991 film titled Climate of Concern set out with crystal clarity how the world was warming and that serious consequences could well result. Now, I find this shocking that an oil firm, especially one as fucked up as Shell, put this out in 91. So that's pretty huge. I'm really wondering how this thing got funded within Shell. Really interested. Tropical islands barely afloat even now, first made inhabitable and then obliterated beneath the waves. Coastal lowlands everywhere suffering pollution of precious groundwater on which so much farming and so many cities depend, says the film's narrator. Over disturbing images of people affected by natural disasters and famine. Okay, let's go ahead and see if we can find this. Let's see if we can find, maybe it's on YouTube, and yeah, here we go. It's only 28 minutes. Maybe we'll watch it. The full. All right, I'll throw this in here. Take a look. What? Maybe we'll watch that towards the end. The company. In a crowded world subject to such adverse shifts of climate, who would take care of such greenhouse refugees? Film acknowledged the uncertainties in the computer model predictions at the time, but noted the various scenarios had each prompted the same serious warning. A warning endorsed by a uniquely broad consensus of scientists in their report to the United Nations at the end of 1990. They put out a report to the UN? Okay, I gotta sit down. Hold on, I gotta sit down. I can't even process that. Can you even process that? Wait, I don't even get this. Wow. Okay. What they foresee is not a steady and even warming overall, but alterations to familiar patterns of climate, and the increasing frequency of abnormal weather is a caution. It is thought that warmer seas could make destructive storm surges more frequent and even more ferocious. Whether or not the threat of global warming proves as grave as the scientists predict, it is too much to hope, as it might act as the stimulus, the catalyst to a new era of technical and economic cooperation, the film concludes. Our numbers are many and infinitely diverse, but the problems and dilemmas of climatic change concern us all. Holy crap. The film was made for public viewing, particularly in schools and universities, but is believed to have been unseen for many years. It was remarkably prescient, according to Professor Tom Wigley, who is head of the Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia, when it helped Shell with the film with the 1991 film. Wow. It is amazing. It is 25 years ago. Incredible, he said. It was quite comprehensive on what might happen, what the consequences are, and what we can do about it. I mean, there's not much more, he said. There's not much more. He said the predictions for temperature and sea level rises in the 1991 film were pretty good compared with current understanding. What's really striking is nothing has happened since to make you doubt the science as it was stated then, said Tom Burke at the green think tank E3G and a former member of Shell's external review committee. But Shell's actions on global warming since 1991, such as major investments in highly polluting tar sands and lobbying against climate action, have been heavily criticized. In 2015, it was accused of behaving like a psychopath by the UK's former climate change envoy and of being engaged in a cynical attempt to block action on global warming. Even its own former group managing director, Sir Mark Moody Stewart, said in 2015 it was distressing that remarkably little progress had been made on climate change by Shell and other oil companies. Okay, look, here's the videotape for it. And got the Shell logo up there. That is just mind-boggling. Mind-boggling. Okay, let's... "28 minutes, yeah, so that's the full thing. This is probably here. I'll go and throw this in here too. Holy crap. Holy crap. The revelation of the film, obtained by The Correspondent, a Dutch online journalism platform, and shared with The Guardian, has renewed the criticism. The film shows that Shell understood that the threat was dire, potentially existential for civilization, more than a quarter of a century ago, said Jeremy Leggett, a solar power entrepreneur and former geologist who had earlier researched shale deposits with Shell and BP funding. I see to this day how they doggedly argue for rising gas use decades into the future, despite the clear evidence that fossil fuels have to be phased out completely, he said. I honestly feel that this company is guilty of a modern form against crime against humanity, truth, and the crime against the natural world. But they point out that they have behaved no differently than their peers BP, Exxon, and Chevron. For people like me, which there are many, that is no defense. Yeah, and it doesn't matter what the others have done. They knew it, and they even lobbied for it. Action on climate change. They put out a fucking movie, well, 28-minute movie, but still on it. So they definitely, most assuredly knew better, and yet they acted opposite it. Paul Spedding, HSBC's former global head of oil and gas and now at the think tank Carbon Tracker, about half of Shell's reserve base is natural gas, the least carbon intensive of the fossil fuels. However, its oil portfolio could be a ticking tar sands time bomb. Tar sands, which make up nearly 30% of group oil reserves, are significantly more carbon intensive than conventional oil. As things stand, Shell's oil production is destined to become heavier, higher cost, and higher carbon, hardly a profile that fits the outlook described in Shell's video. Shell had in fact known of the risks of climate change even earlier. A confidential company report written in 1986, also seen by The Guardian, noted the significant uncertainties in climate science at the time, but warned of the possibility of fast and dramatic changes that would impact on the human environment, future living standards, and food supplies, and could have major social, economic, and political consequences. So 86, they had a report, and then 5 years later, they put together the video. Okay, so they're working on it. That's good. 1989, Shell had already taken the effects of climate change into account in the construction of an oil rig. I will be adding this to my environmental policies as a link. But in that same year, the so-called Global Climate Coalition, GCC, was formed by the major oil companies, including Shell's U.S. operation, Shell Oil, lobbied hard to cast doubt on climate science and oppose government action. That's in 89. And in 1998, Shell withdrew, citing irreconcilable differences. So in 86, they knew about it. 89, they were lobbying against it. 91, they put out this video. 98, they withdrew from the organization. However, Shell remained a member of another business lobbying group that campaigned against climate action, the American Legislative Exchange Council, all lovingly known as ALEC, until 2015, and remains a member of the Business Roundtable and American Petroleum Institute, which both fought against Barack Obama's Clean Power Plan. The company has said it remained a member of groups that hold different views on climate action to influence them, but Thomas O'Neill from the group Influence Map, which tracks lobbyists, said the trade associations and industry groups are there saying things the company cannot or does not want to say. It's deliberately that way. Shell's 1991 film linked fossil fuel burning with rising atmospheric CO2 and said the serious warning of dangerous warming was endorsed by a uniquely broad consensus of scientists. This is kind of showing the carbon, I guess, how much carbon is used and how much carbon dioxide is put into the air because of it. Shell has also lobbied directly to undermine European renewable energy targets, a sector that it invested in, although at a much lower level than oil and gas. In 2016, Shell launched its new energies division with annual spending less than 1% of the total 30 billion Shell pumps into oil and gas. So here's if Shell knew about it back then, the smart thing that they would have done would have been to immediately start working on sustainable energy. Putting, that 5% per year or 10% per year into a new subsidiary working on sustainable energy. I mean, geothermal, my God. Because geothermal uses much of the same technology that oil drilling does. They could have exploded into geothermal. I mean, my God, they could have revolutionized it in 20 years. But no! And they could have been a global leader on geothermal energy. Despite the company's public support since the 1990s for carbon taxes to drive cuts in emissions, in 2015 it lobbied for exemptions for the electricity it produces and uses, particularly for its offshore oil and gas platforms. Some of Shell's investments today are also criticized for being incompatible with the 2 degrees Celsius warming target agreed by the world's nations. 2015 Carbon Tracker report concluded that the company was planning to invest more than $75 billion in such projects over the following decade, part of a carbon bubble in which reserves are being developed that cannot be burned if climate change is to be halted, a concern shared by the Bank of England and World Bank. Another Carbon Tracker report in 2016 cited a 1998 Shell document showing the company was aware of this risk. Shell knew about but did not act on the risk of a carbon bubble, the report said. Looking back over the last 20 years, it seems Shell has gone backwards in terms of transparency and is still recycling the same old green initiatives and attempting to deflect responsibility in the face of an existential threat to its business. And again, this was written in 2017. Shell was one of the first major oil companies to acknowledge the need to act on climate change and has long argued that providing affordable energy was vital for the world and its development. The 1991 film, anticipating the problem, how could developing countries continue to advance but leapfrog the energy-intensive phase of development by which other nations prospered before its adverse consequences came into light? Exactly. Good question. But in 2015, its own external review committee concluded Shell's sustainability report did not adequately convey the urgency of this low-carbon energy transition. Earlier in February, Shell CEO Ben van Beurden said, "We believe that climate change is real and we believe that action will be needed." When will action be needed? How much money are you going to throw into it? Moody Stewart, who was also chairman of Shell from 1998 to 2002, told The Guardian the broad criticism of the company was unfair. I don't think enough has been done, but I wouldn't single out the oil industry. Governments and others have some responsibility, and Shell and others have called for a price on carbon since the 1990s. Oh, okay, sure. Governments have completely and totally failed, sure, fair, but you've known about it and you put out a video and you actually lobbied, you talked to the UN about this upcoming problem. So, yeah, you knew. You should be held responsible on the level in which you knew this was a problem. Hasn't got very far at all, but that is not Shell's fault, he said. It is pretty unique for an industry to be actually asking for something which will increase the price of their product, but they're asking for it because that is what is needed to drive the industry in the right direction. That is incorrect. Yes, carbon offsets will increase some, but it's something they can write off because it's nothing. It is nothing. This is nothing on the scale of which is needed to save humanity from extinction. It's easy for them to talk about carbon offsets because it's the cheapest form that they can advocate for to make themselves look good so that they aren't really negatively impacting their profit margins. They love carbon offsets. Burke, a former head of Friends of the Earth, agreed there is a wider problem. It is too easy to blame it all on Shell for getting it wrong. He said there has been a broader societal failure. Shell's 1986 report said the climate change problem was one that ultimately only governments can tackle. Bullshit. But also noted over 3 decades ago that the energy industry has very strong interests at stake and much expertise to contribute. It also has its own reputation to consider, there being much potential for public anxiety and pressure. Group activity should affect profit. Exactly right. Exactly right. It should affect profit, not price of product. And that's what I've talked about. I don't think I have this in my policies, but maybe I do. Let's see. Price rate. Let's see. Oh, no, I do. Yeah, it should affect their profits, but not price. Come on. I don't have it in here. But yeah, exactly. Yeah, I probably have to add this in here. Because when I have talked about this, that's exactly right. That, like the increase in prices here in the United States, the first thing that the U.S. government should have done is price regulation. Boom. The fossil fuel industry has had record-breaking profits under a case where they have record-breaking inflation. That's crisis profiteering. the US government should have instantly dropped price regulation and then taxed each and every one that has increased, or actually fined every fossil fuel industry that has increased their prices. Okay, it's a really great article. Yes, price regulation is a good thing. Let's see if I can turn this on and see if it'll decide to work for me. All right, so any questions on that? This is amazing. Do they have it? Okay, this is the correspondence. Let's watch this. See what they have to say. The music, mute that, and let's listen.
A warning endorsed by a uniquely broad consensus of scientists in their report to the United Nations at the end of 1990. And the result has been a marked and accelerating increase in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. In California, solar heat has been successfully harnessed to provide electricity on a commercial scale. So has the power of wind.
That what we're doing is not rational, but just simply fashionable. We're talking about doing stuff that makes us feel good rather than stuff that actually does good.
If the threat of global warming is to be realistically addressed, the future will need to be different. Global warming is not yet certain, but many think that to wait for final proof would be irresponsible. Action now is seen as the only safe insurance. Our numbers are many and infinitely diverse, but the problems and dilemmas of climatic change concern us all.
Wow, there we go. And also I'll note, I think from last week we went over the Ever. One of their, do I have this in here? So this is their, one of their big, not this one, one of their big, no, not here. One of their big investors is Shell, if I remember correctly. All right, there we go. Wow, this is just mind-boggling. All right, any questions or comments on this? It's positively rage-inducing. I mean, they knew, and they could have been doing geothermal. They could have been a global leader in geothermal. I mean, what they could have been doing it's just mind-boggling how much they could have advanced sustainable energy in the past 80, advanced math, 40 years. I mean, just 30 years. It's just, oh my god. Oh my god. The rage. All right. I've got two new tech things here. Telescoping CAN wave energy device beats test predictions by 20%. AWS Ocean Energy. It makes me think Amazon Web Services. I don't, not that. Now, later they'll show us a picture of this, and this thing is fucking ginormous. It is huge. Like, this thing is put on a tractor trailer, semi-trailer, and it fills the whole thing. It is giant. So the Archimedes Wave Swing prototype has been installed for testing over the last 6 months, as delivering better results than expected. AWS Ocean Energy. I will... No, okay. Oh, I've got images. Okay, so yeah, here you see a picture of it on a semi-trailer, although it's kind of hard to see the full scale of it. Oh, here you go. It is huge. I think they said it's like 50 tons, some shit like that. It is massive. The water now. All right, this is from 6 November. Let's do it. Scotland's AWS Energy has reported results some 20% better than predicted for its Archimedes Wave Swing, a prototype wave energy generator that's been undergoing ocean-based testing at the European Marine Energy Center in Orkney for the last 6 months. The Wave Swing is a cylindrical metal buoy that's tethered to a single point on the ocean floor. In operation, it stays beneath the surface and responds to water pressure changes. As a wave passes overhead, the pressure increase pushes down on the top floater section of the device, sliding it downward relative to the lower silo section with a rolling seal, ensuring no water gets in. The linear motion in this telescoping CAN compresses the air in the wave swing device, creating an air spring to push the floater section back up as the wave rolls onward. As the floater moves up and down, it drives a hydraulic motor, which converts the linear motion into rotation, and a regular electrical current draws power from both the upward and downward strokes. Okay, let's watch this. So we can see how this beautiful thing operates. This has subtitles. Okay. Yeah.
The Wave Swing is a subsea pressure-actuated buoy tethered to the seabed. It works on a similar principle to the Cartesian diver toy. The device consists of a pair of structural components, the floater and the silo, which, together with a rolling seal, enclose a volume of air. Under a wave crest, the increasing hydrostatic pressure forces the floater downwards, compressing this air volume, which in turn acts as a spring to return the floater upwards. The floater's motion is constrained to 1 degree of freedom by a set of bearings. A hydraulic cylinder coupled to a hydraulic motor converts this reciprocating linear motion to rotary motion, which is then converted to electrical energy using a conventional generator. The device's performance can be tuned by adjusting the internal air volume. And a winch system enables tidal compensation and recovery to the surface. Smart control software enables performance to be finely tuned to the incoming sea state, maximizing power capture.
All right, there you go. The device can be raised and lowered on its tether for maintenance and deployment, and there's also a facility to regulate the air pressure inside the cylinder, effectively tuning the air spring to take maximal advantage of the wave conditions. AWS reports that during a period of moderate wave conditions at the EMEC installation, the prototype machine captured an average of 10 kilowatts with peaks of up to 80 kilowatts against a rated capacity of 16 kilowatts. The test has also demonstrated that the wave swing can be fully deployed from a sitting quayside to fully operational in less than 12 hours. That's cool. And that it can survive Force 10 gale conditions. Power output frankly looks surprisingly low to us given the size of this machine. It stands a towering 7 meters or 23 feet tall, fully extended, with a diameter of 4 meters or about 13 feet, and it weighs 50 tons. It makes a pretty impressive sight as it's driven down the road on a trailer. Yeah, it's 50 tons. Ginormous. But this is not the commercial device. AWS says these units will be configured for power ratings between 15 kilowatts and 500 kilowatts, although it's unclear whether these half-megawatt versions will need to be physically bigger, or if so, by how much. The company sees commercial deployments taking the shape of multi-absorber structures, which could see 20 of the most powerful units arrayed together in a 10-megawatt platform. According to IRENA, there's enough energy in the motion of the ocean, specifically in wave energy, as opposed to tidal energy, to meet the world's entire energy demand. But the technology here is in its infancy. There are plenty of pilots and prototypes, but precious few commercial installations. And since nothing has proven itself yet, there's a fascinating proliferation of different designs, all duking it out in search of a solution that's cheap, easy to deploy and maintain, eco-friendly, and capable of producing power in all sorts of conditions for decades, despite the brutal corrosive assault of salty seawater and sludgy biofouling. Effectively harnessing wave energy could radically lower prices of renewable energy grids. These things won't shut down on a night like solar or when the wind drops, so they can reduce the need for long and short-term energy storage that a grid needs to guarantee a reliable electricity supply. This, as CSIRO modeling for wave swells energy Uniwave generation system suggests, could splash upfront CAPEX, capital expenditure, on multimode renewable energy systems by as much as 2/3. So this is something like when I talk about when we're doing sustainable energy, we should have multiple forms of energy in the same space if we can. So we could have this being a wave energy thing below the water. Then above the water, we could have a tidal wave generator. And then further down, we could have tidal stream energy, all kind of in one place. So maybe you could have your wave here, and then over a little bit would be your tidal one, and then way down here would be the stream. You could generate a whole lot of energy in one area by stacking it as well as you can. So it's an area of immense potential and consequence, but also where one, it seems, will need to keep being patient. See the WaveSwing prototype operating in the video below. And another thing, when we're looking at Shell, right? Shell could also have been investing in geothermal, which it was well positioned to do, and also any tidal wave and stream sorts of things, since they're already investing in, studying the ocean and the sciences and the waves and stuff when they have to deal with their rigs. I mean, they're well positioned for both of these sustainable energy technologies, and wind as well. They have to know that sort of science for their rigs. All right. This does not have captions. Okay, this is really short. Amazing what engineering can do. Wow. All right, there you go. So that's this. I'll probably end up adding a link to this as well to my policies. Another form of neat wave energy devices. I couldn't find a huge article on this, but I think this is how let's say minutes. Yeah, this is how I found out about this. I like this as a concept for batteries. And any questions on the wave energy thing? Looks neat. I like it. I like it. I love it. All right, let's go ahead and watch this. I'll lower this so that we can get video in. All right, here we go. Almost back here. There we go. A neat type of battery.
Lithium-ion batteries are great for storing energy, but over time, as they charge and discharge repeatedly, they slowly lose this ability. However, a new startup called Rondo Energy have secured $22 million in funding for their new superheated storage system, which can charge and discharge for over 100 years without the materials becoming less effective. In this video, we'll see how they've achieved this with 98% storage efficiency at energy densities equal to lithium-ion batteries at 20% of the cost and without using critical materials.
There's nothing that is not available basically on every continent except Antarctica.
This combined means that we can end the need for batteries in large-scale storage where heating is required. Storing energy is quickly becoming one of the most important challenges of the century. The cheapest clean energy sources are unpredictable. Therefore, the energy has to be stored while it's generated so that we can use it when we need it. Lithium-ion batteries are being used for energy storage in people's homes, all the way up to huge ones connected directly to the grid. However, storing energy like this on increasingly large scales is expensive and can have negative environmental impacts. So how is Rondo Energy avoiding this problem? And what makes their system so special that it's got the likes of Bill Gates' clean energy funds interested? Some systems choose to use gravitational energy or mechanical energy, but Rondo is using thermal energy, which is particularly useful if you're planning to heat something. Now, many other thermal storage systems exist, but by the end of this video, you'll see why this is different. The first big issue for most thermal storage systems is that they're too cold for many applications. This problem is actually twofold, because it means they store less energy and they can't deliver heat at the required temperatures. For industrial heat, when working with steel, cement, fertilizers and ethylene, steam near or above 1000 degrees Celsius is often needed.
Some of our investors are cement manufacturers precisely because they picked us because this is the pathway for making a big early step reduction at low cost.
Although we don't often think of industrial heat in our day-to-day lives, it makes up a huge percentage of global energy consumption. In fact, 36% of total greenhouse gas emissions come from industrial applications, with 74% of those emissions coming just from heating. Clearly, this is a big problem. And whilst batteries could be used to store electricity that is then later used to heat up steam to the required temperatures, it is almost always too expensive. However, with the Rondo heat battery, cheap renewable energy combined with cheap storage makes this green option cheaper than using natural gas in many global markets. This is a real win-win, especially when you consider that this is a market labelled as hard to decarbonise. Now we know why the Rondo heat battery is so useful, we can look at how it works. Although this system is generally simple to understand, there's some really interesting engineering happening behind the scenes. The overview is that intermittent energy from the grid comes in and powers electrical heaters, which are used to heat the bricks in an echo heating chamber. When the bricks are heated and the system is charged, air can be blown over those bricks and heated up before being used to heat steam in a heat exchanger for continuous use in industrial applications. The great thing is, these are all well-proven technologies from other sectors that Rondo is using in a new and novel way.
To the greatest possible extent, we're not inventing things, right? We're really building on we stand on the shoulders of giants. Our core innovation was the core physics insight, and then the system design and all of it and its applications.
The core innovation that John is talking about is that echo heating chamber I mentioned earlier.
That was the breakthrough that led to being able to build a heat battery that can be super low cost, super efficient, and high enough temperature to deliver about 95% of all the industrial heat that's in use worldwide.
The echo chamber is where the bricks and heater sit, with each of them radiating heat to one another and bouncing around like an echo. And this is what makes the system possible. Most other heat battery systems rely on a fluid like air or water to heat up the storage mass, which may be rocks or sand, for example. However, this requires turbo machinery and causes hotspots within the battery as the heat is slow to conduct through the storage medium. Both of these limit the operational temperature and the rate that you can charge and discharge the system.
One of the things that we see in electricity grids around the world, the faster you can charge, the greater the benefit you can provide to the grid.
The reason the radiation echo chamber works can be seen in the radiation equation. The first three terms are the Stefan-Boltzmann constant, the emissivity of the material, and the surface area. However, what is important is the fact that the temperature variables are put to the fourth power. This means that if the temperature of one brick is even just slightly colder than another brick, there'll be a massive amount of heat transfer to it through radiation, enabling uniform heating and no hotspots. The extremely high temperatures this technology enables also means that the system can have energy densities as high as lithium-ion batteries at around 260 watt-hours per kilogram. But this total energy density can only be achieved by discharging the battery much below the 1000 degrees Celsius output that we need, as the energy stored is proportional to the change in temperature. Therefore, Rondo can use a double stack approach, which means one heat battery can deeply discharge to far below 1000 degrees and be used to preheat the air before going into a second stack and heating to the required temperature for the steam. One thing I was interested in is how this heat battery manages to maintain its heat over up to 12-hour periods when no renewable energy is coming in, as this would require some pretty serious insulation due to the high temperatures. For this reason, Rondo is using dynamic insulation. This works by having a double wall surrounding the heated bricks with an air gap in between them. This is somewhat similar to double glazing, which uses argon gas between the two panels, as argon is very bad at conducting heat. However, what makes Rondo's insulation dynamic is that the air in the air gap flows around the whole system before being directed through the heat battery and over the hot bricks. This means that the final layer of insulation only has to deal with temperatures of around 150 degrees instead of around 1500 inside the actual chamber. Although industrial heat is clearly a big enough sector to tackle on its own, Rondo's heat battery could actually be used in other situations, such as district heating, where thermal energy is stored and delivered to houses on a heating network.
On a cost per stored energy, remarkably, storing heat at over 1000 in brick and then mixing it down and delivering 120 C heat off that is lower cost than storing heat in a water tank.
Storing heat is clearly an interesting topic, but if you want to learn more about extracting it from the ground, check out this video and like and subscribe to see more videos.
All right. I really like this idea for a battery because it's simple and it doesn't require rare earth minerals or anything like that.
Lithium-ion
And
battery.
it's pretty efficient, and that's awesome. It is. All right, 11. Now we can go through this. Or we could watch the shell video, which is 28 minutes long. Ah! My son works for PGE. He was told they had done tests with Tesla designed batteries. They had to be outside, yet they weren't waterproof, so they had to shut him up aside so water would run off. At one point, a cell failed and fire was shooting out. The Tesla people weren't too bright. Oh, yikes. Thank you, Lisa Scraps38, for the follow. Really appreciate that. Glad you found something of value. Where are you from? I'm from South Central Wisconsin in the US of A. Yeah, Tesla is, Musk and his stuff is proving to be problematic. Twitter, all it's been Twitter for the past few days is all about Musk and the blue checks and stuff like that. So it's been pretty interesting to be on Twitter watching this massive clusterfuck that Musk is engaging in. He paid $44 billion for it, and the previous owners made out massive bank for that. Now it's just gonna Scotland. Okay, cool. Welcome. Yeah, Scotland's got a lot of good stuff going on. I'm jealous about that. You guys have a nice Green Party doing lots of great things over there, and just lots of good things going. So good on ya. Thanks for all your work. Because we here in the United States aren't doing jack shit. And we are actively inhibiting sustainable energy and sustainable everything globally because America sucks. Thanks for doing your part. Appreciate that. Yes, welcome. Right now I'm only streaming once a week, Saturday from 2 until 5 o'clock US Central Standard Time. So we've got about 45 minutes left before I call it a day. The first part, we covered a lot of COP27 stuff and just bitching about how jack shit's gonna happen there. We've done some sustainable energy stuff. Now we're about to move on to some other things. What do we got? Blood. Lab-grown blood. Egg whites. Filtering. It will get better. I'm not so sure of that. I'm pretty sure we're human extinction in the next 200 years. I'm completely doomer here. But I appreciate the optimism. You've got a better view of optimism over there because you guys are doing stuff, but we're not. So yeah, one of the articles we read, let me go ahead and share this for you, is here. This is really interesting. Shell knew about the climate change thing in well, they knew about it in the 80s, but in the 90s they actually put together this this video here, a half-an-hour video talking about climate change and how it's gonna royally screw everyone over. And then they went the other way when it comes to their support. So we're thinking about watching this Shell video, which is 28 minutes. It's gonna be a bit dated because it's from the 90s. And it's from the videotape, I'm pretty sure. Oh, you've got talking about lab-grown blood and egg whites, carbon filtering for microplastics. What do you think? I think this is going to be interesting. I know more about you guys. Pure evil going down over there. I bet you do. Listen, if you want to bitch about us, you're in the right community because we bitch about it too. We're just bitching about Biden and the hypocrisy of what he's saying, and you know. Oh, and so you know, I've been blogging about politics. Here's my blog. Been blogging for a decade. Here's my policy site. Movie or blood. That's right. Those are your options. And here's my policy site. A large part of it is my, actually the largest part of my policies is my environmental policies. If you want to see where I stand, there's a lot of reading there. It's like almost an hour read to get through it, but there's lots of links to different forms of sustainable energy and why the United States is bad and all that sort of stuff. Good stuff. So yeah, what do you think, Lisa? Got the 28-minute movie, or do you want to go into blood? We'll probably go into blood afterwards. We'll probably have, yeah, we'll have time afterwards to go into that. Good. Good to see you. And then, yeah, we'll probably get through this video, and then one more article, and then we'll be done for the day. All right, let's watch this. Oh, it says captions. Let me pull this down a little bit. Get it all in. Okay, so this is the video that Shell put out in the 91. Like right as they were going to the UN saying, "Hey, climate change bad." So let's go. Let's watch this. Here we go. Let me know if it's too loud.
Far out over the Atlantic, a flying observatory. On board, another day of familiar drills and routine procedures. Even at the frontiers of science, understanding comes rarely in a flash of intuition. More often it emerges gradually from a mass of patiently gathered data. Sampling, for instance, the mix of gases in the atmosphere at different times and seasons, different altitudes. Or monitoring the flux of life in the oceans, the movement of its hidden currents in relation to the changing temperature of its surface waters. Research of this kind is being stepped up worldwide. The need to understand the interplay of atmosphere and oceans has been given a new sense of urgency by the realization that our energy-consuming way of life may be causing climatic changes with adverse consequences for us all. The moon. In shadow, its surface temperature drops to minus 150 degrees Celsius. In sunlight, it rises to over 100. Virtually at the same distance from the sun, temperatures on Earth are much less extreme, and we owe this life-giving fact to its atmosphere, in particular to the presence of the so-called greenhouse gases. Energy from the sun reaches us in the middle bands of the electromagnetic spectrum as light and heat. To balance this daily income from the sun, Earth radiates energy back, but only in the longer wavelengths of the infrared. But it doesn't all escape back into space. Some of it is absorbed in the lower atmosphere, mainly by water vapor, but also by carbon dioxide. Throughout the long period of man's rise to civilization, This blanket of heat-absorbing gases has kept the average global temperature around 15 degrees Celsius, against the moon's -20. But in the last 150 years, this balance has been altered. Burn any organic matter, and its content of carbon combines with oxygen. Burning a cubic meter of natural gas produces roughly 2 kilograms of carbon dioxide. A liter of gasoline, 2.5 kilos. Burn a ton of coal, and you release up to 4 tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Since 1850, the consumption of these fossil fuels has increased 100-fold. Add to this the more recent burning of the tropical forests, and the result has been a marked and accelerating increase in the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. What's more, there's been an even sharper increase in other, even more potent greenhouse gases, which absorb energy at different wavelengths, retaining even more heat in the atmosphere. Nitrous oxide and ozone, mainly from traffic. Methane from cattle and rice fields. And new to nature, the CFCs, used as blowing and cleaning agents and refrigerants. These other gases could soon be absorbing as much radiation as carbon dioxide. But has this started to make the Earth warmer? Weather is hard to predict, but records of its past behavior go back a long way. Fertile ground for the revealing eye of the computer.
This warming gradually spread to the rest of the Arctic by the 1930s and into the 1940s. And by 1941, the warming has spread across the Arctic and extensively covered most of North America.
Region-by-region analysis of world temperature records shows a small but significant warming trend over the century, with a marked increase in the 1980s.
It's beginning to spread down to the tropics as well.
Yes, it's not just over land areas, it's over ocean areas in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean.
Reduced to global averages, it shows a rise of just 0.5 degrees Celsius. This could be due to some natural climatic change, but it does accord with computer models based on the known atmospheric processes and predicted buildup of the greenhouse gases. These models contain many uncertainties, but they forecast that by 2050, global mean temperature could have increased by at least 1.5 degrees, possibly near 4.
Snow melt there.
This may not sound much, but what the computer modelers are looking at is the possibility of change at a rate faster than at any time since the end of the Ice Age.
I think particularly over the ocean here, over the North Pacific.
Change too fast, perhaps, for life to adapt without severe dislocation.
These mid-latitude regions in the southern hemisphere.
What they foresee is not a steady and even warming overall, but alterations to the familiar patterns of climate and the increasing frequency of abnormal weather. No two scenarios fully agree, but their strange, mesmerizing images of possible futures have each prompted the same serious warning, a warning endorsed by a uniquely broad consensus of scientists in their report to the United Nations at the end of 1990.
Now remember, this is in 1991 when they put this out, in their climate modeling that they did themselves through Shell and working with whoever else shows their climate modeling that we're headed for the same place, 1.5 to 4 degrees. It's mind-boggling.
By that time, early predictions that rapid melting of the polar ice caps would inundate coastlines and drown major ports and cities had given way to a less apocalyptic vision. Instead, a slow rise of 1 meter or so over the coming century. But even this could be disastrous. Tropical islands, barely afloat even now. First made uninhabitable, and then obliterated beneath the waves. Wetland habitats destroyed by intruding salt. Coastal lowlands everywhere suffering pollution of precious groundwater, on which so much farming and so many cities depend. And the sea doesn't always destroy by stealth. The coincidence of high tides and severe storms that broached the defenses of Holland in 1953 was a freak event. But it's thought that warmer seas could make such destructive surges more frequent and even more ferocious. Today, Holland lies safe behind its elaborate and expensive defenses. Elsewhere, in a poorer world, land and people remain at risk. Bangladesh is no stranger to disaster. A sixth of its land is barely above sea level. Land on which 20 million people depend for life and livelihood. If the weather machine were to be wound up to such new levels of energy, no country would remain unaffected. A high priority for the climate change modelers' attention has been the future distribution of rainfall and the impact of global warming on agriculture. Today, with only 2 months' reserves, 5 billion people depend on just a few strains of staple grains, each grown within restricted climatic limits, at the mercy of the weather. And tomorrow, with its prospect of billions more mouths to feed? What is now considered abnormal weather could become a new norm. We have seen the consequences in our own time, but mostly at farming's outer margins. Next century, this could perhaps be its heartland. In a crowded world, subject to such adverse shifts of climate, who would take care of such greenhouse refugees? Faced with such a disturbing scenario, governments are having to consider their response. Global warming is not yet certain, but many think that to wait for final proof would be irresponsible. Action now is seen as the only safe insurance. But what should that action be? Down there, in the real world of the here and now, 1 billion people are intent on maintaining their high standard of living. 4 billion more trying hard to catch up with them. Till now, the dynamic of rising material standards has been coupled to an ever-increasing consumption of carbon-based energy. Can that coupling be broken? Can emissions of the greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide, be cut back fast enough to provide that essential insurance without blunting the forward thrust of development? In a world of nation states, could such a global target be agreed, let alone achieved? Flying high over the poles, scientists regularly monitor the strength of the Earth's protective layer of ozone. The discovery that man-made gases used in industry were destroying this vital shield brought an unusually swift political response. But the international agreement to phase out the use of these CFC gases was signed in the knowledge that safer substitutes could be developed. To reduce emissions of carbon dioxide is a far greater challenge. Even if a common target could be agreed, each nation would have to decide how best to meet it, which of the available options to choose. Advocates of nuclear power see the chance to revive its flagging fortunes, a clean form of power to replace fossil fuels. They point to new designs of reactor considered inherently safe and so cheaper to build and simpler to operate. But public anxiety about reactor safety and concern over the disposal of radioactive waste suggest it's unlikely that nuclear power could be expanded fast enough to make a real impact on carbon emissions. Water and natural steam have been generating electricity for close on a century. But there is limited scope for further large-scale projects. For years, the harnessing of various forms of energy derived from the sun has been written off as uneconomic or of limited application and value. But new technologies and courageous investment have brought a change of perception. In California, solar heat has been successfully harnessed to provide electricity on a commercial scale. So has the power of wind. Two potential sources of clean power already, and others may soon follow. Widely applied, they might help reduce the adverse impact of growing energy demand. But they could not alone do enough to slow global warming as fast as the scientists advocate. An ultimate answer remains way beyond our reach: the dream of clean, cheap power from nuclear fusion. Technology apart, the costs of slowing global warming are potentially enormous. That's why the most favored option, and the one thought most cost-effective, is a drive for greater efficiency in the way existing forms of energy are produced and used. From the air, the principal target can be made clearly visible. Waste heat, revealed as reds and yellows by infrared photography. Over half the energy we consume is never put to useful work. Look, for instance, at what happens with electricity. A major source of man-made carbon emissions are the world's coal-fired power stations. Of the coal's available energy, only 35% is transformed into electricity.
Yikes.
Further losses occur as the power is distributed and used. An incandescent light bulb converts only 5% to light. 95% is lost as waste heat. Less energy wasted would mean less energy needed, less carbon dioxide, and the added benefit of saving precious resources of fuel. Simply changing from coal to gas could cut carbon emissions by roughly 40%. And using the latest combined cycle turbine technology can raise the efficiency of power generation even further. But for many countries, gas is not an available option. Coal itself can be gasified and used much more cleanly and economically. Fluidized bed combustion is another of the new technologies that can achieve efficiencies well above conventional levels. Whatever fuel they use, power stations cannot avoid producing surplus heat, but it need not go to waste. Denmark is one of the countries that has pioneered its use for district heating. Metropolitan Copenhagen's ambitious new scheme has effectively doubled the overall energy efficiency of its power stations, and so halved the volume of carbon dioxide that would otherwise have been produced. The principle of combined heat and power can be applied in a variety of ways. It can even provide steam and hot water for an individual building or factory process. It can be applied just as effectively to established installations as to new purpose-built ones. Within the time frame set for the stabilization of carbon dioxide emissions, many existing installations will come due for renewal, a chance to upgrade performance by up to 50%. Whatever combination of energy services is needed for a particular building or industrial process, a key to optimal efficiency is the revolution in control technology brought about by electronics and the microchip. What's more, the high levels of energy efficiency that can now be reached in large-scale installations can also be achieved on the much smaller scale of private housing. These low-energy houses were built to show what can be achieved. They look perfectly conventional, an important point in their favor. Whether for heating or air conditioning, the same equipment and controls can equally well be used to upgrade older houses, older blocks of flats. To combat global warming does not mean scrapping an entire way of life, but it does mean changing public perceptions and attitudes to its extravagancies. If everyone switched to the new low-energy lights, cities the size of New York, Moscow or Bombay could each cut over 1 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions every year. Nearly half the world's oil is used by its 500 million road vehicles. 400 million of them are private cars. And every year, each of them produces on average 4 times its own weight in carbon dioxide. Vehicles of all kinds have constantly improved in performance and reliability. But the internal combustion engine has remained only some 20% energy efficient. What might the future bring? Inventive genius has already taken the solar cell across Australia at 70 miles an hour. But this is unlikely to be the way forward. Today, the average car may still travel less than 10 kilometers on a litre of gasoline, but it could go 3 times as far. The prototypes, petrol and diesel, already exist. What are the chances of even a majority of cars performing to such a standard in 15 or even 20 years' time? Behind the question lies the crux of the whole issue. To combat the threat of global warming will take more than a set of technological fixes. What would induce consumers to insist on and pay for the speed of change necessary to make an impact on the problem? What carrots, what sticks might governments employ to stimulate their economies in the right direction? Advocates of intervention can point to certain precedents. In a number of countries, the switch to unleaded petrol has been encouraged by tax concessions. Taxation can work both ways. Already there's talk of a carbon tax on the principle of heaviest polluter pays most. But how to achieve fair compliance across national borders? There are encouraging signs here too. The European Community, for instance, has agreed to radical new pollution control standards applicable to all new cars from 1993. But global warming calls for a global response. And the world is not a common market. In Eastern Europe, decades of bureaucratic incompetence and neglect have left a legacy of outworn, outmoded industry and a blighted environment. If the threat of global warming is to be realistically addressed, the future will need to be different. Others are coming from even further behind and face even greater problems. Their ambition is not just to follow behind the richer nations, it's to catch up, and they will have to cope with the needs of fast-growing populations too. As they transform themselves into urban, industrialized economies, their share of world energy demand is bound to grow ever more rapidly. What then? How could these countries continue to advance but leapfrog the energy-intensive phase of development by which other nations prospered before its adverse consequences came to light? Their cities stand as impressive symbols of their entry into the modern world. But everywhere, resources for further development are stretched to the limit. The added demands of a rapid improvement in energy efficiencies would be a difficult challenge to meet, unless the latest and best technologies could be made available to everyone. Whether or not the threat of global warming proves as grave as the scientists predict, is it too much to hope that it might act as the stimulus, the catalyst, to a new era of technical and economic cooperation? Our numbers are many and infinitely diverse, but the problems and dilemmas of climatic change concern us all.
the Shell Oil Company put this video out in 1991, and then they also talked with the UN about climate change, I think, earlier. And then they shifted to climate denialism after that. It's amazing. I mean, they've known since '86 that this was an issue. They put out this video in '91, talked to the UN, and then they about-faced. Yeah, it was a trip. I mean, they showed solar panels, they showed they showed wind turbines, they showed the solar car. I mean, there was stuff happening then that they could have jumped into. They didn't show geothermal. They even showed sustainable wave energy too. I mean, they could have jumped on all of that. So much they could have done, and they knew it, but they didn't. So, it just fills you with even more rage at Shell because they put this out and they went the other way. Yikes. Just yikes. All right, I'll share this again for anyone else who's watching. All right, any questions or comments on that video? Next, we've got lab-grown blood. Fortunately, they've got all caps for their... It drives me nuts. Not accessible, fuckerheads. All right, and this is from Horizons. I don't know much about them. Do we have a date on this? 12 minutes. This is short enough. There's no date on here, but I guess we'll see. First ever lab-grown blood could change medicine forever. For the first time ever, scientists have given patients red blood cells that were grown in a lab. This feat is part of a clinical trial in England looking into the safety of the cutting-edge technique, which could help tackle the ongoing blood supply shortage that was worsened by the pandemic. The trial is a collaboration between institutions including the University of Bristol, the University of Cambridge, and the National Health Service. Regular transfusions can be life-saving for people with conditions like sickle cell disease, which affects the shape of red blood cells and can block blood flow, and thalassemia, which causes the body to produce too little of a protein called hemoglobin. Now, these lab-grown red blood cells could stretch sparse donations into larger volumes. The procedure could also help address the need for more blood from Black donors. Sickle cell disease is prevalent among Black people, and blood is most compatible when donated from people from the same race or similar ethnicity. And unlike donor blood, which can contain relatively old cells, these lab-grown cells are guaranteed to be fresh. This means they can last longer and perform better, reducing the need for frequent transfusions. When people receive lots of transfusions, they also run the risk of developing too much iron in their bodies. Okay, that's interesting. How to grow new blood cells. Scientists started with a regular blood donation, used magnetic beads to pinpoint the flexible stem cells that can morph into red blood cells, CNBC reported. Then they put the stem cells in a nutrient solution for 18 to 21 days, which nudges the cells to proliferate and grow into more mature cells, according to The Guardian. Then they tag the cells with a radioactive substance to track them in blood samples from trial participants over 6 months following the first injection of the cells. So far, 2 healthy volunteers have received lab-grown blood cells, and they haven't reported any negative side effects. Next up, the team will give a minimum of 10 participants 2 mini transfusions at least 4 months apart, one consisting of a standard donated red blood cells, and another composed of lab-grown one. Researchers will analyze patient blood samples to determine whether the lab-grown red blood cells will last longer than the ones made in the body. While further research is needed, this marks a major step forward in treating blood disorders. Need for normal blood donations to provide a vast majority of blood will remain, but says Farouk Shah, the medical director of transfusion at NHS Blood and Transplant. But the potential for this work to benefit hard to transfuse patients is very significant. Okay, so that's it for that. All right, now this is from November 4th. This is from Phys.org. Egg whites can be transformed into material capable of filtering microplastics from seawater. Sounds super useful. Oh, the structure of the aerogel is formed by graphene sheets stretched across carbon nanofiber networks. Okay, we'll see if that has anything to do with this. Researchers at Princeton Engineering have found a way to turn your breakfast food into a new material that can cheaply remove salt and microplastics from seawater. Researchers used egg whites to create an aerogel, a lightweight and porous material that can be used in many types of applications, including water filtration, energy storage, and sound and thermal insulation. Craig Arnold, the Susan Dodd Brown Professor of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering and Vice Dean of Innovation at Princeton, works with his lab to create new materials, including aerogels for engineering applications. One day sitting in a faculty meeting, he had an idea. I was sitting there staring at the bread in my sandwich, said Arnold, and I thought to myself, this is exactly the kind of structure that we need. So he asked his lab group to make different bread recipes mixed with carbon to see if they could recreate the aerogel structure he was looking for. None of them worked quite right initially, so the team kept eliminating ingredients as they tested, until eventually only egg whites remained. We started with a more complex system, Arnold said, and we just kept reducing, until we got down to the core of what it was. It was the proteins in the egg whites that were leading to the structures that we needed. Egg whites are a complex system of almost pure protein. When freeze-dried and heated to 900 degrees Celsius in an environment without oxygen, created a structure of interconnected strands of carbon fibers in sheets of graphene. Oh, okay. In a paper published August 24th in Materials Today, Arnold and his co-authors showed that the resulting material can remove salt and microplastics from seawater with 98% and 99% efficiency. Wow. Respectively, the egg whites even worked if they were fried on the stove first or whipped, said Seamus Osden, first author on the paper. Osden is a former postdoctoral research associate at the Princeton Center for Complex Materials and now a scientist at Aramco Research Center. While regular store-bought egg whites were used in the initial test, Osden said other similar commercially available proteins produced the same results. Eggs are cool because we can all connect to them and they are easy to get, but you want to be careful about competing against the food cycle. Yeah, good point. Said Arnold, because other proteins also worked, the material can potentially be produced in large quantities relatively cheaply and without impacting food supply. One next step for the researchers, Osden noted, is refining the fabrication process so it can be used in water purification on a larger scale. If this challenge can be solved, the material has significant benefits because it is inexpensive to produce, energy efficient to use, and highly effective. Activated carbon is one of the cheapest materials used for water purification. We can compare our results with activated carbon, and it's much better, said Osden. Compared with reverse osmosis, which requires significant energy input and excess water for operation, this filtration process only requires gravity to operate and wastes no water. Oh, wow. That's good. Very efficient. While Arnold sees water purity as a major grand challenge that is not the only potential application for his material, he is also exploring other uses related to energy storage and insulation. The research included contributions from the departments of Chemical and Biological Engineering and Geosciences at Princeton and elsewhere. One thing to make something in the lab, said Arnold, and it's another thing to understand why and how. Collaborators who helped answer the why and how questions include Professors Rodney Priestley and A. James Link from Chemical and Biological Engineering, who helped identify the transformation mechanism of the egg white proteins at the molecular level. Princeton colleagues in geosciences assisted with measurements of water filtration. Susanna Monti of the Institute for Chemistry and Organometallic Compounds and Valentina Tazzi from Istituto Nanoscience and NEST Scuola Normale Superiore created the theoretical simulations that revealed the transformation of egg white proteins into aerogel. All right, there you go. I think we'll stop there because we got like 3 minutes left. Ugh. This is super cool. Any questions or comments on this, or anything else we've talked about, or anything you want to go over before we call this a day? We've got 3 minutes. Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of amazing things that we're researching and being able to do. It's just mind-boggling what people are working on and what's really possible. Science, technology is amazing. Yeah, all right. Well, how about this? I'll go and end a little bit early. Yeah, thanks for being here. I appreciate you gifting me with your time. It's amazing. Got here so early today. That was awesome. Hadn't even finished my monologue and even started anything. So I hope the rest of your weekend goes well. And stuff. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Have a great weekend. Thank you. I'm glad you do. I really do. Sometimes it feels like I'm just talking to the void here, but when you show up and everything's better. It makes a difference. Have a great weekend, Girly Bear. Thanks. Oh, not too bad.